Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining LADCR this evening for this webinar on cannabis funding and investments. Tonight's topic is focused on cannabis investor Q&A. What is BLC? The Department of Cannabis Regulation has officially launched the Business Licensing and Compliance Assistance BLC program to assist social equity applicants in the city of Los Angeles with obtaining a commercial cannabis license and operating a successful cannabis business. Program highlights: self-directed online education on topics related to running a successful cannabis business through our new learning management system. Excuse me. Live webinars with subject matter experts like this one, checklists, worksheets, and other management tools. Please visit cannabis.lacity.org for more announcements on our ever-expanding BLC program. Now I'm going to go over some quick attendee housekeeping rules. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and can be viewed after the editing process on DCR's website. You will be muted with cameras off for the duration of the webinar. This means that your camera and audio functions will not be available to you during the session. However, you will be able to see and hear all the panelists. There is an open chat box where you can interact with one another for networking or comment on information. Please ask questions about the subject matter in the Q&A box. We are gathering them and will respond to as many of your questions during the Q&A session towards the last 20 minutes of the webinar. You are encouraged to utilize the Q&A box at the bottom pane of your Zoom screen. Chat is available for interaction with other participants. If you use the Q&A box for questions, everyone will be able to see the questions when they're answered. Friendly reminder, please use caution when sharing personal information in a public forum and keep your questions focused on tonight's topic. Quick DCR disclaimers: the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation does not endorse specific companies or products. The content presented here is for informational purposes only. This content was created by the Department of Cannabis Regulation or the City of Los Angeles and is for informational purposes only. The information is subject to change and does not replace or supersede the Los Angeles Municipal Code, nor constitute legal advice. You can call 213-978-0738 during business hours to speak to a DCR representative. Thanks. And reminder to drop your questions in the Q&A box. And now I'm super excited to introduce our speaker tonight. Our subject matter expert, David Hess. David is the co-founder and president of Trust Capital. A two-time cancer survivor, David was introduced to the vast benefits of medicinal cannabis while undergoing cancer treatments in 2001 and again in 2003. David has since dedicated himself to furthering research, awareness, impact, and business opportunities in the ever-expanding cannabis industry. In 2013, David partnered with Asher Trope, an experienced fiduciary and independent trader on Wall Street with over a decade's experience managing equity portfolios, to establish Trust, the cannabis industry's go-to source for private capital solutions and strategic support. Trust Capital is a strategic boutique private investment firm embedded at the core of the global cannabis sector, originating and managing investments for HNW, family office, and institutional investors. Trust has a track record of successful industry investments and works closely with companies in the industry providing active value-add support. The Trust portfolio includes impactful industry leaders such as SC Labs, Headset, Tilt, Cannabis Now, Waste Tracker, Grownetics, Northbud Farms, Infusion Biosciences, ICANN, Tyson 2.0, Heisman, and Takal. With a unique industry network, deal flow pipeline, successful portfolio investment track record, and an experienced team with in-house niche expertise, Trust Capital is the go-to for sophisticated investors seeking competence, while Trust Solutions provides M&A advisory, strategy, business development, and operational support to sectors companies. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce David to join me on screen. Welcome, David.
Sam, thank you for that intro.
Of course, David. And I mean, I went over a lot of your background and your story, but would you like to give a little further introduction, just share anything that I missed, or do you want to jump right into the questions?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually really special that I get to do this evening. I'm originally from LA, and as they say, you can take the the guy out of LA, but you can't take LA out of the guy, right? And so,
Heck yeah.
cannabis in general is a subject that I have that has really been like near and dear to me really since '96. I was on the ground in LA as a senior in high school, getting signatures for Prop 215. Right. And then once just because it was a really cool job to, hang out outside of, Ralph's, right. And get signatures for cannabis legalization. Right. Not even thinking that there was a remote possibility that it was going to pass. Right. And then once it actually did pass in '96, my family, which is third generation Californian, began to embark on the legal cannabis journey, right? And so for any of the legacy cannabis operators in the house this evening, that resonates very well with me. I myself began my journey as a cannabis legacy operator back in the mid '90s, and if it weren't for about 2 bouts with cancer, as you mentioned in the intro, I would not be in New York. I'd still be in LA, but I still own a home in LA. And my parents, my wife's family, my siblings, grandparents, everybody is still out there. Those grandparents that are still alive are still out there. And I'm out there probably a good 40–50% of the time. And so, you can catch me on Instagram as dhes213. And that's me. That's I live on LA time. I've still got my LA accent. Love the LA weather, and so I'm LA through and through. So this is very special, and I look forward to connecting with many in the chat this evening. This is going to be really exciting.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, I do want to thank you again. I know you're in New York right now, so you're 3 hours ahead of us. It's a lot later. And yeah, thank you from everyone for being on and taking the time to, just share this information, because it's priceless. So we all appreciate it. But without further ado, I think we'll jump into these questions. I know you have some great answers ready, and I'm hoping we can get through all of them along with the audience questions as well. But the first question, as an investor, list the top 3 traits you look for in a cannabis entrepreneur.
It's a great question. Number one, and you'll find this across the board with all the companies that we've invested in and most of the companies that we work with, it's going to be mission, right? And an impact-based business. So, for me, and just to reiterate, right, I come from the legacy community, and so, but early on, and yes, we're still early on, even though we're a couple decades in, depending on what state you're in, especially California. It's still the early days of legal cannabis, right? And this cannabis industry. And so for us, our investments, aren't going to be, sort of like the cookie cutter investments that you might see across the board, especially 10, 11 years ago when we first got started. We wanted to ensure that this industry had legs to stand on, and that's why you see investments like SC Labs, which is testing and ensuring, right, a third party is verifying what's in the cannabis that we're growing and purchasing. In fact, states like California got that going back in 2018, and many states have since followed, which is extremely critical to our industry. Or media like Cannabis Now, right? And offering exposure to brands and operators, coming into this new nascent industry without having the ability to create a brand using traditional methods and media channels that are out there today. So impact and mission is critical. And when creating a brand, I always recommend that you really hone in on why you're doing it in the first place, right? The second would be subject matter expertise. You may or may not be surprised how many times we see opportunities, and it could be just a tech play, for example, in cannabis, and the the founders themselves, don't have any experience whatsoever in technology. So that's something that we're probably not going to take a longer look at, right? But if you come to us and validate that you're a subject matter expertise, and you've got significant, meaningful experience with what you're doing, then that's something that's going to catch my eye, right? And I'm going to pay a lot closer attention to. And then finally, previous exits, right? At the end of the day, we're a VC firm and we're managing capital for others. And we want to make sure that we're not just building, but that we're also returning the capital to them. And that for 99.9% of the time, maybe even 100 actually, I don't know why I'm saying 99.9, our investors are reinvesting that capital back into the industry. And so it's important that there are exits, and that for those that are new to the game here, that just means that you've started a company and you've sold that company, or have taken that company public, or one way or another have returned that capital back to the investor. And if you can validate that, if you've done it once, excellent. If you've done it multiple times, even better. In fact, our initial investment in cannabis was Headset, right? We wanted to ensure that there was data in the space, especially many with us tonight are going to be or are retail operators, and we understood that retail operators aren't going to put product on their shelves based on what they like, right? That's not going to give them the greatest chance for success, right? And then once they have picked out the products that they're going to put on shelves, what do they price it at, right? And so having data like Headsets, right, and some other great companies like Headset in the industry was really important for us. And so that was our first investment. And what really attracted to them was they had recently had sold Leafly, right? They started Leafly. They sold Leafly to Privateer. And so they successfully exited, right? And so for us, we had, we were mitigating our risk as investors, especially in a new industry, and we could be confident that they knew how to get from point A to point B and then return the capital so they can start something new. And yeah, so those are the three: mission-based, subject matter expertise, and ability to validate an exit, right?
Thank you so much for that. Now, quick, just follow-up question. If I'm hypothetically speaking, a founder that's looking to raise capital and I don't have a previous exit under my belt, what are some of the things that I can maybe show from my past, or, some of the things that you as an investor would like to see? Because I just don't have that,
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be necessarily a business, right? If it's a business, great, right? But what you want to show is that, you've taken in money and you've paid it back. So maybe it's a loan, on a piece of property. Maybe it's a car, some type, and it could be as simple as you've got great credit, right? I could tell you this: if you've got really poor credit and you've never run a business before, never had any exits, I would caution you about getting into the cannabis industry in the first place. It's a very, very highly competitive industry. And, it requires a lot of capital, but more importantly, it requires patience. It requires a lot of passion. It requires, a lot of the things that if you've never run a business before, it's going to come as a shocker, and a lot of people run to cannabis, not just on the investment side, but certainly on the operator side, because they think it's a path to like a quick treasure, right? And it's not the case, right? A lot of the social equity operators with us this evening come from the legacy community, right? So these are operators that know how to run a business. And, that's another part of this question, right? What if they've run a legacy business for years, right? But wasn't on the books necessarily, right? Does that have value? Absolutely, right? Especially to an investor, like Tress, right? We certainly recognize that. How to value that is another question. But certainly, we want to know that you've set benchmarks for yourself, you've taken in capital from others, you've returned that capital. But that, when you run a business, you've and successfully taken that business, from point A to point B, you've scaled a business, you have certain attributes that we're inherently looking for. So yeah, if you haven't run a business, um, definitely, I caution, if you're going to go at this alone, highly caution that find a partner. There's nothing wrong with finding a partner maybe that has done that. In fact, in New York, that was one of the prerequisites, right, for social equity applicants, was that they also, either themselves or a business partner, ran a successful business for 2 years. Which I don't think is the craziest thing, right? That's part of this, especially when you're looking for capital from others.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it.
Mhm.
And let's move on to the second question. So this question is just general advice for cannabis entrepreneurs entering the cannabis industry.
So absolutely, you have to stay focused, and that goes back to understanding your mission statement, right, and understanding where your value lies. Networking, right? I can't emphasize enough how critical networking is to your business, right? And staying in touch with industry peers, learning from thought leaders, always being in the room, whether it's events like the one we're doing tonight, which you can participate wherever you are in this world thanks to technology. So there are really no excuses why people can't be participating, whether it's in person or via Zoom webinar like we are this evening. Just make sure you're learning and keeping up with all the latest regulations that are coming out, all the latest opportunities available to you, and resources. Most important, there are tremendous amount of resources available on a national level and on a regional level. So unless you are constantly speaking with others, you're not going to know about them. So definitely staying, ear to the ground, but at the same time, staying very focused in your lane, not taking on too much. And then I would say most importantly, I guess, stick with your core values, right? A lot of times I see operators, especially when they're looking for investment. I saw one operator the other day, he looked completely different, right? And he was all dressed up. And I'm saying, don't do this, right? Dress to impress, of course, but don't change who you are on the inside, right? Because I asked him, I said, why? Oh, it looks like you cut your hair and you did this. You really changed your look. And he's like, well, I came out to the East Coast and I'm looking for Wall Street money. And I said, okay, but at the same time, make sure that you're not, partnering up with somebody that has a different set of core values than you do. And obviously what's on the outside is just, not really important. It's really truly what's on the inside. But that's just, a small example, right? Stay true to your core values. Make sure you're partnering up with investors that share those core values. And if you do that, generally you'll be okay.
Heck yeah. Thank you for that. That's great advice. Next question. Are certain company legal structures better or more suited for capital investment?
Yes and no. So every company that we've invested in here in the United States, and I say that because whether it's ICANN or a few others, we have invested internationally as well. But every company here in the U.S. Has been an LLC or a C corp. They've been typically domiciled in Delaware. That doesn't mean that if based on your regulatory situation in your state, that requires you to be domiciled in your company's home state, that's okay too. But and by the way, being domiciled in Delaware and being a home company in California, for example, is not just for cannabis, right? That's typically how it's done for most LLCs and corporations. And that's easy to look up and speak with your accountant about as to why. And there are many benefits to doing it that way. But certainly, what I would say is if you can have the end in mind, right? And what I mean by that is, where do you see this going? right? If you're going to, one day become a public company, right? Then you're going to set up, and structure yourself accordingly, as early as you can. If you a company where you're going to stay small, mom and pop, you're not looking for outside investment, you'll set up your structure that way, right? So it's as best you can, think backwards, right? And sort of leave yourself some breadcrumbs, right? And then work your way up the trail. Because a lot of times, you're building, as I mentioned, you're building very, very specifically towards that eventual exit. And a company that has aspirations to go public is going to structure themselves, raise capital, and align themselves very differently than one that's that's intending to leave it to their kids and grandkids, future generations. Neither are bad. It's just a very different way of setting it up.
Now, do you think investors, because it sounds like, you're one type of investor, but in general, do you think investors are looking more for companies that have a plan to exit? Or do you think they are like you, where it's like, if you want to like pass it down to your family, that's still a good thing type of thing,
So there are many, there are many types of investors, right? When you're thinking about venture capital, private equity, right, and the larger checks, right, those investors are 100% looking for their money back. In fact, a fund will need to make their money back within typically 7 to 10 years, right, which is the life cycle of that fund, right? So the fund will raise their capital, and unless it's an evergreen fund, which means that they're deploying that capital as they raise, right, they're going to raise that said capital, let's call it $50 million, right? And then out of that 50, now they have to make allocations within the first, year to 2 years, because they have to wind that fund down, and return the money, like I said, within 7 years. Maybe sometimes they'll get a little bit of an extension, right? And you'll make it 8, 9, or even 10 years later. But those years happen fast, right? I remember the first MJ BizCon. I was there, right? And we're 11 years past that right now. We just had our 11th, right? So it happens quick. That means, right? And fortunately, we have had, 4 or 5 exits at this point. But the companies that we first invested in, right, are either exiting at this point or going public, or one way or another, returning that capital, or we're realizing, a very high mark on that valuation, that we're still in there, and they're continuing to raise capital, in which case we'll stay in, we'll reinvest. But things just aren't going to stay stagnant, for 5-6 years, which can happen with a smaller business. Then there are angel investors, right? An angel investor, they have absolutely zero timeline, right? So, that's someone, it could be a relative, it could be a friend of a friend, it could be the doctor or the dentist, that you visit, that you start talking about the new opportunity that you're involved in, and next thing you know, hey, yeah, I'd like to potentially invest in that, right? These are people that know you on a little bit more of a personal level, and that's probably where you're going to want to go for your investment if you're not really thinking about an exit at all, right? If you're not thinking about going public, selling your company or brand to, somebody else in, 4 or 5 years, if you're not even thinking about it, then it's not going to happen, right? Just because you are thinking about it doesn't mean it's going to happen, right? But that's the first steps, right? And as I mentioned earlier, that's how you're going to structure a company. That's how you're going to who you're going to align yourselves with, how you're going to raise your money. But there's nothing wrong at all in being a mom and pop, right? I would say like a one-off mom and pop retail operator in a pretty decent state, right? Cannabis legal state, making net, $2-3 million a year. I mean, that's sending your kids to college, that's feeding your family nicely, that's probably buying a decent sized home, even in LA, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not going to create generational wealth, but that's not what everybody needs to do, right? Or what everybody's out to do. So there's really an investor for every type. And that's really goes back to understanding what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you're raising your money. And then when you do, you'll have a much easier time lining yourself up with that very specific type of investor first, before the specific investor or specific investors.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. Now we've talked about the top 3 traits for an entrepreneur, but if you don't mind, can you list the top 3 traits you look for in a cannabis business?
So the business itself, it's going to be very similar to the traits that we're looking for in the founders, right? Some of the things that happen, once we take on, a new portfolio company, is a lot of communication, right? And not everybody is a great communicator. And I don't mean, in language, right? The act of communicating, right? Not everybody sends emails. Not everybody wants to have somebody, or they might even have this idea, oh, someone's looking over my shoulder. That's not what it's about all the time either, right? It depends on the investor. Some will be sort of that, like, looking over your shoulder, make sure you're doing it right. And then slowly tapering off, hopefully, right, as they have more and more trust in you and the organization. But it's imperative to be able to communicate the good, the bad, and the ugly, as they say, right? It's a marriage, a lot of the time, and especially for an active value add investor rather than the passive investor. And so just being able to communicate not only will benefit the relationship now and tells me that this is probably a business I want to be involved in, but the lack of communication certainly tells me it's something that I don't want to be involved in, right? The ability to plan, execute, and meet benchmarks, right? And I always advise people to set them kind of low at first, right? Because everybody's setting these grand expectations. And I look at them and I say, the chances of you meeting those benchmarks are so slim, right? Or you're going to have to change what that benchmark is and lower it at some point. Why don't you just keep it real low at first and just hit it? I'm going to walk 10 feet today. Walk 10 feet, right? Boom, you hit your benchmark. I'm going to do 10 push-ups. Boom, you hit 10 but people like I'm just giving like a diet and exercise example. People are like, I'm going to change my entire lifestyle. And then, they do it for a couple of days and then they never do it, right? So, that translates very, very easily into business, right? If we can't hit the benchmarks, the little benchmarks that we set for ourselves in business, we're not going to hit the large ones. So, the ability to plan and hit those, smaller benchmarks. And then of course, the execution. And then finally, I would say the ability to pivot. A lot of the businesses that we're involved in, believe it or not, didn't start that way. All right. And I can give one as an example. That would be Baker. All right. When Baker started back in like 2012, 2013, when we invested in them, they were all about, customer loyalty, and then completely pivoted into something else, and then became, merged into a massive, conglomerate, which is today Tilt. And it's, you never know where you're going to end up. You want to have a very good idea, right? And that's part of planning. But when something, we just all experienced, we're kind of coming out of it now, but we have a very good memory of COVID, right? When COVID came, like, the world stopped. And if people didn't, people could have great businesses, a great product, but if they just aren't able to pivot when necessary, it's not going to be a successful business, right? Or not going to be nearly as successful as those that can. And so whether it's regulatory issues that come up, or just, the business, you thought it was going to go one way and it just, a niche opened up and you have to take it into a new direction. It's critical for the lifeblood of that company. And so that's what we look for. We look for, have you run a business before? Name me some times you've had to pivot, whether it's worked out well or not. That's secondary, right? Remember, it's the ability to pivot, whether or not that worked out, secondary. So yeah, that's, and then as I mentioned earlier, right, we're looking for impact, right? Our dollars, we want them to have ripple effects, and that, you know, that doesn't happen by accident, right? So that's our plan from the beginning, right? That each dollar, you know, should have that massive effect, and that we see the impact in addition to the outsized return that we're looking for, right? And that we not only see the impact, but we're measuring that impact along the way in many cases too.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And just
Mhm.
a quick follow-on question to that. Now, you mentioned properly planning and executing, to hit your benchmarks. If I'm making a pitch deck and I'm putting my slide together for my projections, what do you like to see? Do you want to see projections that say I'm going to be a billionaire next year, or more realistic projections that I can actually hit? Because I just want to make sure that's kind of what I was hearing, but I want to make sure everyone else, here's your perspective on that.
Yeah, so great question again. Um, so an investor, especially one that's, you know, a bit seasoned, right, which is generally what you're going to run into at, you know, a VC or, you know, private equity, those analysts are going to spend a few minutes at most, right, the first time they look at your deck, right, and first time they look at, you know, your opportunity. So if you're going to give them, and I've seen this happen hundreds of times to be conservative, right? People are sending 30, 40, 50 page decks. There is no way, right? I'm going to sit there and read 50 pages, right, about this opportunity. Remember, you're up against thousands of others, right? And so if I can understand what an opportunity is in just a few minutes, right? Or an analyst can, more importantly, can understand what they're looking at in just a few minutes, then and it checks a bunch of boxes, and we'll go through what those boxes are in a moment. Then it gets to me, right? And that's what you want, right? You want it to sort of travel through the steps and not get caught anywhere, right? And so what you want to show are, you know, a couple of key elements, again, which we'll go through right now. So if you got pen and paper, I suggest, you know, definitely get it down for these things here, because this is, like I said, this really gets to the heart of it. It's something that I look at, and it's helpful for us as investors, right? The better decks we receive, because how terrible would it be, right? If a great opportunity I never really got to do diligence on because it was just it was too long of a deck, you know, like that would suck. It would suck for them. It would suck for me, right? I don't want to miss on that opportunity. So let's go through some of the things that I want to see and some of the things that I don't want to see. So number one, keep it concise, right? Investors aren't any different than anyone else. We don't have the longest attention spans these days, and we're all over the place. So, keep it concise. We don't need all of the generalized cannabis industry statistics, right? You're speaking most of the time to industry experts, right? So they don't need to know how many millions of dollars are projected for the cannabis industry in 2025 and in 2050 and all that, right? If you really just feel like you have to put that in, right? Because it is good for you to know, right? If you really want to put that in, put it in an addendum, right? Put it in something else, but keep your like your meat and potatoes, so to speak, to like 10 to 12 pages max, right? And let's get into what those are, and what they're going to be are essentially your unique strengths, your path to profitability, and the time it's going to take to achieve traction in the industry. We're going to look at some of the risks, and then ultimately, as I've been mentioning, the ROI. So what are some of the things that you should be taking note, that people should be taking notes on? Number one, I want to understand your business model, right? By the time I finish that, and again, it should be concise, right? I need to understand what your business is, right? Why does it exist? How your business is going to earn money, what that time frame looks like, right? And then, is it a realistic plan? You know what I mean? Like, just on if you told me, you're going to sell cannabis at $3,000 a pound, right? Well, right, everybody in this chat right now and on the webinar tonight knows what cannabis is selling for at wholesale right now per pound. So if it costs you more than the cost to produce, you're in trouble, right? If you can't sell it for more than what you produced it for, right? And so I can't even tell you how many decks I saw years ago that their cost to produce cannabis was well over $1,000 a pound, right? And if fast forward to today, which we were looking at projections very early on, and if they were having, we're going to sell all the cannabis in the world, right, that we produce, and we're going to sell it at $3,000-4,000 a pound, we just cut that right in half, 50%, right, off the bat. And then we say, all right, if in a worst case scenario, right, this happens, how feasible is it that you'll achieve success, right, and that the money gets returned to the investor and life is good, right? And so make sure that your business plan looks feasible. The last thing we want to see, we like rockets when they happen and hockey sticks, like they say, right? We like the trajectory, but more realistic, rarely does a business have these massive leaps, so we want to see consistency, right? Year over year, what you think you're going to, how you're going to, maintain that success as well is something that we want to see, right? We want to understand the go-to-market strategy, right? Number two, and that's plainly, how are you going to penetrate the market, right? So right now we're talking about, right, businesses and dispensaries in California, right? How are you going to realistically penetrate and sell the cannabis to your consumer, and sell the product to your consumer, right? If you're going to say, well, we're going to sell all the hottest strains, what do you mean? Well, so is everybody else. Okay, well, then you're going to say, well, we're going to house all the hottest brands. So does everybody else, right? So what are you going to do to realistically penetrate that market, right? And a lot of times that goes into your community, and lots of other ways that, but certainly, where's the traction going to come from? And how can that traction be accelerated with the capital that we're going to potentially provide, right? So what's that go-to market strategy? Really understand your branding, your advertising, and all that good stuff. But ultimately, how are you going to penetrate the market? Number three, who are your competitors, right? A lot of times, we know who the competitors are, and we know them very well as investors, right? Especially, the VCs that are specific to cannabis. So if someone comes to me and they don't know who their competitors are, that's an issue, right? And so, it's not only understanding who the competitors are, but what are, and not just the primary competitors, secondary competitors, right? And then understanding your advantage and your unique strengths are critical, right? And it just really illustrates the awareness, right, of the operator, of the obstacles and strategies that they need to implement in order to mitigate those risks, right? Number four, the team. And as we spoke to before about the founders, and it doesn't have to be founders, right? It can be that the founders brought on relevant experience and expertise, right? Like we talked about, right? If you hadn't owned a business before, bring on a partner. It doesn't have to be a 50% partner, but bring in a partner that does have that experience where it does mitigate some of that risk, both to yourself and the investor, right? And so who's on that team that can provide that experience, that has the past success, that has executed in the past. And when I also say team, list some of the advisors you have been able to attract, list some of the investors that are on the cap table, right? FOMO is real, right? So create that FOMO. If I see, and I get this all the time, I get calls daily from some of the other funds wanting to know what we're looking at, right? And it's not just because they want to shoot the breeze, right? They want to not get left out on some great opportunity, right? And so we're constantly checking in with one another. So if you can create that FOMO and get somebody, and it's not hard to, a Google search, you can find out who like the top 20, 25, funds are in the space, right? But if you can capture one of them, the chances of you capturing 2, 3, 4, 5 of them are a lot greater, and vice versa, right? Again, some of these are what we want to see and don't want to see, right? If I see that you don't have anybody like that as your advisor, or don't have anybody on your cap table that I recognize, that's a red flag to me as well, right? Because unless I'm the first person in cannabis seeing this, which sometimes I am, but unless that's the case, that tells me you've shown it to quite a few others and none of them, were interested. That's going to say something to me as well. So if you do have that, highlight it for sure. Number 5, the market size and the opportunity, right? So there are really going to be 7 things, right? So we're on number 5 right now in the deck. Number 5, what's the TAM? TAM, the total addressable market, right? A lot of people, like I said, they'll tell me, this is the opportunity in cannabis, and this is how many people consume cannabis in the state of California, and so we are going to provide cannabis to a certain portion of all those people, period. That's not necessarily called a TAM. That's not your total addressable market. That's not your segmented addressable market. It's really narrowing it down to, who your customers are, how you're going to acquire them, where are they located, what are they spending, and what's a realistic addressable market that you're going to penetrate. And if you tell me it's going to be this massive market, well, then I'm going to ask what the share of that market, how are you going to, what percentage of that market are you going to collect on? So if you're going to capture, if I say if you say your total addressable market is everybody, let's say you're in Beverly Hills, right? So, or LA, right? We're in Los Angeles, right? So if you tell me, I'm going to address everybody, in the Fairfax area, from point A to point B on the map, right? And this is how we're going to do it. Oh, okay. Now we're talking about more realistic TAM as relatable to, a retail store, right? Is going to be versus, these are the people of Los Angeles. There's so many people in Los Angeles, and X amount of people are aged between 18 and 56, consume cannabis. That's not what we're talking about, and that's sort of peripheral. And I want you to I want to understand, that you really have a grasp of who you're going to be selling the product to, who's going to be purchasing, who's walking in the door, how much they're spending. And this doesn't take a lot of words either, right? Again, like I said, like all these 7 points can easily be hit in 10 or 12 pages, right? Total, right? And just with bullets on each page, right? So we're not talking about writing, a book here, financials, right? You have to list, right, what the costs are, where are the profits, where's the cash flow coming from over the next few years. And as I said, optimism is great, but don't exaggerate. You know what I mean? Be realistic, because that's what we're looking for. And we can identify when someone's being realistic or not. Identify the IP, your trademarks and other assets. And I was actually speaking about this with someone today when they were developing a logo, right? They were getting back logos from a certain artist that were clip art, right? And I said, I don't know if you want to be using clip art, for your logo. And it's something as elementary as this is, I think it's good to discuss, right? When you're building a logo and a brand identity, there's potentially a lot of value that you're building, so you really want to spend some time ensuring, what you're creating has meaning, number one, and is not copying anything else, right? Anybody else is infringing on anybody else's IP, but that you are, really creating something defensible that someone else can't steal. And when you do that, and it really speaks to your brand or your service or your store, and helps create that brand identity and loyalty with the consumer, there's a tremendous amount of value, that had. And yeah, I don't care that it costs a couple $100 to create that value, right? That logo one day, I mean, think about what like Coca-Cola or Nike, some of these trademarks and identities are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And so when you're creating something like that, it's extremely important. So don't just give me what your costs are in the cash flow, but discuss what your IP and current trademarks are as well, and know what that value is, right? Don't, when you are a new business, right, and you do have that, you're already coming with some value, right? And then finally, what's the ask, right? Whether you're speaking with an investor, whether you're doing, you know, like a Shark Tank type of pitch contest, or presenting a deck, or even just on, you know, like putting out an ad, right? There has to be a call to action, right? There has to be an ask, right? Don't give me something where I'm left wondering, what do they want, right? Clearly illustrate what the needs are, what the use of funds, right, are for, you know, for that capital. Are there any other growth phases expected, right? So if you're creating new technology, you know, this first ask might just be for the prototype, right? But help me understand that there's going to be a second ask right after that. Once the prototype is developed, we're going to have to now put this, you know, into production, and that's going to be phase 2. And then probably after that, there are going to be some edits made in phase 3. So we need to understand, you know, where this is in that process. But you have to ask, right? And be very clear about how much you need, why you need it, and when the intent is to pay that back, right? Or how the investor is going to realize that return. Because as much as I want to be on this ride with you, we have A, ourselves, and B, our other investors that we need to ensure that they're seeing that return on, you know, most importantly, so that they can continue to invest in great entrepreneurs like yourselves, right? And so that's just how that happens. That's the cycle.
Definitely. That was amazing. Thank you so much. And if it's okay with you, do you mind if we just kind of copy and paste, you know, the 7 points for anyone that may have missed these
Oh,
notes, put them in the
absolutely. Go
Okay,
for it.
cool. So we'll definitely get those in the chat box. I'm not exactly sure how to do that, so if someone can help me with that, that'd be awesome. But I do have a follow-up question. It might be a two-part question, but you know, you were talking about the ask, and you're talking about you know, you might be talking one-on-one to an investor, you might be in a Shark Tank like pitch. So my question is, if I'm raising capital, do I just need one deck, or do I need maybe 2 decks or 3 decks for the different situations? You know, is it the same deck that I'm presenting on stage in front of an audience that I'm presenting one-on-one with someone, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so you can have like a main deck, right? And a teaser, right? And then yeah, I would have a couple of versions, right? One version, you know, when you're speaking with, you know, an angel investor, and maybe one when you're speaking with a VC or someone in private equity, right? Because the ask might be a little bit different. The the reason why we're investing might be a little different. Our expected, you know, return, right? We were saying the life of my fund, right, being 7 to 10 years, I need to see that money back in 7 to 10 years. So if your deck says something like, you know, in 20 years from now, we intend to sell the business or go public, well, then I need to stop, you know, full stop right then and there. You know, so yeah, so really understand who you're showing it to and make sure that the deck is geared to that investor. You don't want to waste your time. You don't want to waste the investor's time. That's just not good for anybody. So yeah,
Awesome.
and like I said, the addendums, right? Like you might be an operator, like we talked about, right? Like you've never run a business before, but you were an outstanding athlete. I don't know, right? And you have all these accolades and awards that you won along the way. That would be something I want to see. Maybe not in the actual deck, but in an addendum. Absolutely, right? Show me, you know, I understand as a, you know, former athlete what that takes, right? And if you've been successful at something that you're passionate about, then that tells me that you're dedicated, that you've put in hours and hours of preparation. You've probably skipped things, right, that you wanted to be at because, you know, you needed to be there for your team or needed to be there for specific commitment that you've made for that. Were you excelling in school while you were doing those things? You know, anything like that will, believe it or not, yeah, it helps tell that story about who we're investing in. I can trust that person. And yeah, we're I would say definitely include those, but include it as an addendum. I again, because that just ends up becoming a 50-page book, right? That's just too much, and it's again like a full stop before it even gets there. And we might ask it in another question. Don't ask me to sign an NDA up front. You know what I mean? And it's not because I want to steal right, your secrets. It's because if you're asking me to sign a legal document, right, well, where does that need to go? That needs to go to my legal department, right? It's a legal document. And so as even if I were like your best friend, right? We grew up together and I trust you implicitly, right? I can't sign that NDA. I'm not an attorney, right? So I need to then put it in the queue, right? And guess how many, our NDAs our attorney is asked to look at, on a weekly basis. Way too many than I care to admit, right? Because that's not free, right? That's his time or her time, actually. And she, I can either have her, right, review deals that we're actively involved in, right? Or I can have her sitting there all day looking at NDAs prior to us even understanding what this is about, right? Maybe it's something like we talked about. Maybe it's something I will never invest in. There's absolutely no impact related. It's something where, they're not looking for an exit. They want to build it and just hold on to it for years. So it's something that like is not for me, right? Or not for trust. Why would I pay a couple $100s to have that reviewed, and certainly, like I said, I'm not an attorney and I'm not signing a legal document that I take very, very seriously, right? If you send me an NDA and I just sign it. No, that's not how NDAs work, right? It's like I said, it's a real legal document. You can hold me to that. You can hold trust to that. So just don't do it. Don't send it pre-deck. Don't send it with the deck. Don't send it, have a teaser, right? And again, I'm not suggesting anybody spill the beans on anything proprietary prior to an NDA. What I am suggesting is share as much as you can prior to asking for an NDA. Get the investor, excited about the opportunity, and that can be done without sharing anything proprietary. And once you're there, I mean, we sign, like I said, we sign NDAs all the time. Maybe sometimes you can ask the investor for a mutual NDA, and if that's something they have off the bat, which of course we do, that's something that can be taken care of in 30 seconds. Because there have been times where opportunities have come and gone in the time frame that the NDA has been in the queue, literally, right? Like we haven't even gotten the NDA back from our attorney before it's too late, and when we finally get it back, we reach out to the operator. Hey, we're ready to start diligence. And they're like, oh, we closed that round, last week. Well, again, that just doesn't help anybody. Right. So, yeah, as much as, I'm sharing the what to ask for, from us, definitely sharing what to stay away from as well.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And we are running short on time. I know you said you might be willing to stay on a few extra minutes, but I know you're on the East Coast, so no notes laid out there. So I want to get to the audience questions, and then if we have extra time, we can go back to these questions. But the first question is from Porsche, and Porsche asked, "What is the best way to raise capital for a startup cannabis delivery?"
Startup cannabis delivery. Great question. So I always suggest first place to go, friends and family. And I'm talking like deep into the friends and family. If you tell me, right, in one of our first conversations, when I ask, right, have you raised capital yet? Because generally when you're coming to me, it's not going to be that first dollar at this point, right? You're coming to me like at least, you're a little bit of ways, into your business, right? And you've already done that first friends and family round. I want to see that, a parent, an immediate relative, somebody that knows you the best, your babysitter, I don't know, someone that literally knows you for a while, someone from a neighbor, a professor, someone that, just someone that's known you for a while, trusts you, has given you money, and whether or not they've gotten that money back, but they trust that they will, right? And if that's never been done, right? Or if someone tells me, I went to all my friends and family and everybody knows me and no one would give me $1, and you want us to, right? That's just not going to happen, right? So, but if you come to me and you say, listen, I went to, we don't have a lot of money, I don't know a lot of high net worth individuals. I just, don't have that in my, in my immediate circle. But what I do have are people that trust me, and they, put $1,000 into my business, right? Because I needed to get something, I needed to get that teaser made, or, I needed to get something out the door. And they were willing to invest that $1,000. And to them, that $1,000 is like, a few $1,000,000 potentially to a VC. And and when we see that there's that trust there, then we are much more willing and to come in and do the same. So that's how I always suggest starting, especially when it comes to a delivery, or maybe something that's like hyper local, right? And if it is a delivery, right, I think about, all right, where is, what are some of the inherent risks, right? I think of off the bat, unless it's a software, I think, someone's actually driving a car from point A to point B, I think of liability, right? And if there's a car accident, what happens? I want to understand, all the risks involved, right? And so, yeah, I would think about that when starting the business. But, most importantly, get those first dollars from friends and family, and then phase in the round, right? So a lot of times I hear people say, when it comes to a cannabis license, especially in Los Angeles, right, or anywhere in California for that matter, it's expensive, right? And the build out's expensive, and people make the mistake of trying to raise all that money at once, right? I always recommend phasing it out. So most of you, or actually all of you, congratulations, have already been selected, right? So you've got your license, boom, phase one. So what I would have done originally would have been raise that money for phase one, right? So I know, only need a couple $100,000, right, to get from today to where I have a license. And that first couple $100,000 should really cover, the application fees, some legal fees, maybe some small advisory fees. What it shouldn't do, right, is, take a massive salary, from that first money that you raised from your grandma, or raised from your neighbor. Don't take a massive salary, stay cool, you'll get there. But and that's what we want to see, right? Where you're allocating money appropriately, and appropriately, some CEOs take, 6 figures, and like I said, some are starting off with just a zero to a couple $1,000s, right? It's all a ratio, right? And that tells me that they respect the capital, and that they have a good, they have a good understanding of what it takes to run a business, right? And it's not just going, like I said, it's not being blown right off the bat, to paying salaries. That's probably the last place it should go to, right? And so really, that's why in the beginning, a lot of the times a startup is going to consist of founders, and wearing many hats, right? And when I say we want to look for expertise, and who's running the books, right? I don't expect it to be a CFO off the jump, right? A CFO, that's going to be one of those 6-figure salaries. Now, when it comes time for a Series A, right? Yeah, that's time to start considering who the CFO is going to be, if you don't have one at that point. But there are a lot of great companies, and offline, I can certainly recommend some that are that are fractional, right? So you might want to look for fractional support, fractional chief marketing officers, fractional chief financial officers. Maybe you're starting out with a bookkeeper, an accountant, and they're not giving you strategy advice on how to best spend those dollars. An accountant, the bookkeeper, is really just keeping track of your spending, right? You're in charge and all that. Whereas, as I mentioned, a CFO can actually help strategize where every dollar is best spent. So make sure that your team is aligned properly as well when you're going to raise that capital, and that your use of funds is properly aligned, properly managed, that you're not putting all your money, for example, into a $300,000 a year CFO. I don't want to see that either, right? You might think, oh, then the investors will be completely confident that it's being managed properly. No, I don't want to see from a startup that $350,000 is going to pay one salary. That doesn't work either. So it's really understanding where you are. And like I said, phase it out. You only need, a couple $100,000 in any state that I know of in the United States, right? To procure that license. And once you procure the license, you may need, $1 million to 2 million to sort of do that initial build out. And then maybe, including inventory. And then you may need another million after that, in operating expenses, right? And until you start until you become cash flow positive. But that's not that 4, 5, 6, $7 million that people think they need to raise just off the jump, and so that's what I would recommend for startups. Keep it simple, raise what you have to, just to get from point A to point B. And then once you're there, it really opens up the pool of capital that's available.
That's awesome advice. Thank you so much for that answer. And I think I've seen it happen so many times where companies raise more money than they need and they overspend, and then they end up, just burning through the money super fast. And I think the companies that raise what they need and are frugal, for lack of better words, they take their money more seriously and they work a lot harder to make sure they're not wasting it. So, definitely agree with everything you just said, but that last point was, that was on point.
And delivery specific, right? I mean, like we said, just remember that there's a lot of you, whatever you are, right? And so what separates you from the rest? You have a fleet of Teslas? I don't know. What separates you from the pack? What are you going to, like Domino's? I don't know. Are you going to get there in 30 minutes or less, or it's free? What? And if so, how are you going to do that? Domino's couldn't even do that. So how are you going to do that? Right? It comes back to realistic plans, right? If you're a delivery driver, don't tell me that every delivery is going to be there in 30 minutes or less, right? Anyway, so back to just reality, and that's what I care about the most. So, it's just understanding what's that unique value proposition of that company. And it could be a lot of things for delivery. It could be the products you have. It could be, who knows? I don't have to, give everyone their business model, but it should be explained. It should be very, very clear to you, right, as the entrepreneur. And then the ability to make it very clear to me in a couple of pages, is something very, very unique. And then certainly when you're in front of an investor, that everyone's heard of the elevator pitch, but make sure you've got something that in 2 minutes or less, you can give someone like myself enough bait, right? You're not trying to give the entire story in 2 minutes. It's impossible. Just, like literally, if you practice in the mirror, the 7 points that we talked about, right? You can get those answers off in 2 minutes, guaranteed. You can get some bullets to me in 2 minutes that hit those 7 things. And the better you're able to do that, the more successful you're going to be as a business, guaranteed.
Definitely. Thank you so much
for raising the capital, but in executing and just being able to compete.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much. That was amazing. We have 2 more audience questions. So it's we're already running a little bit late. Sorry about that. But are you okay with staying on, to answer these 2 last questions? Awesome.
Absolutely.
So Xavier asked, how closely intertwined does an investment company like yours generally look to be with the cannabis business?
So specifically a business like an investor like us, we consider ourselves value add investors, right? And I'm sure you've probably heard that term, but for those that haven't, I'll give you an example, right? So a value add investor is going to be somebody that is more than just somebody that says, here's our capital, and maybe a few other areas of support. Really what an example would be is one of the brands that we recently invested in needed a mold for a specific type of gummy that they're coming out with, and called me up. Hey Dave, we're looking for this mold that we could take into every state. And within a minute, right, I had in my head who that perfect person was going to be, right, and connected that person, and within 10 minutes they were connected, right? Another example would be in our latest investment, Tikal, right? And it's not a secret, which is actually great for many people with us this evening and that are going to be watching. One of the reasons why Tikal which stands for taking all lives into consideration, not just the name that meth, coined for cannabis, back in the 90s, which it is too, and the name of his album. But taking all lives into consideration, right? And ensuring that when he's choosing which cultivar to use, it's not just because the strain is cool. It's something that he consumes, right? And really appreciates himself. But more importantly, if not most importantly, was cultivated by someone that's a social equity licensee, right? We're not, that's who the brand is looking to support, right? And the impact that they're trying to make. And so creating business partnerships like that is critical, for also attracting capital, and really providing that impact across the board, which is really cool.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that. That was awesome. And the last question we have here.
And so just to wrap that, right? So that would be another example. So with Tikal, right? Trust me, as connected to the cannabis world and the community as Meth is, right? Somebody like myself who speaks with social equity applicants on a daily basis, right? I'm able to connect the brand in every legal state with social equity licensees that are cultivating craft cannabis, right? And so that is, I get heavily involved, right, when it comes to something like that, right? I'm speaking with our portfolio companies constantly. I'm on the board of not all of them, because that would just be insane. But I'm on the board of 4 of them right now, and I in addition to that, we also have Trust Solutions, which we provide all kinds of, as I mentioned earlier, right, all kinds of strategy, and other areas of support. So we get very involved. Now, don't mistake that for us telling an operator how to run their business. That's not, I don't have time for that, right? And I probably don't know. I started off, as I mentioned, on the legacy side, and that includes retail, and we're past the statute of limitations here, but that includes having a dispensary myself. And so I understand and have very different conversations with entrepreneurs in the space, which is very, very cool. And so I think so for me personally, I get very involved, right? The last thing we do are passive investments in the cannabis space. But I also understand where my area of expertise lies. Now, it does lie in cannabis. I cultivate very, very well. I've been doing it for a long time. I could probably, for the cultivators out there, I can probably help, with nutrients, lights, VPD, PPFD, and help them understand lots of things. So, when we say value add, it's important to understand what those areas are outside of the capital that we're able to support. But folks like Tress, we're very, very, very hands-on. But again, don't confuse that with us telling someone ever how to run their business. That's just not something we're interested in doing. It's supporting, right, the operators. That's something we're very, very, very passionate about.
Definitely. Thank you so much. That was awesome. And sorry I interrupted there. But Eric has our last question. Eric from Gas Pedal Cannabis, legacy social equity owner. Considering the state of retail and delivery, spending is down and inflation is up, etc., would you advise or recommend seeking an investor or partner with a fund like yours? Or would we be better served seeking a partnership with a big name brand who wants another store under their name, like a multi-store operator? Advantages and disadvantages to both. Is the exit value higher with your brand of retail stores?
Great question. A lot of questions in there.
Yeah.
But let's hit them, right? So yeah, if again, it goes back to where you see this thing, right? If you want to ultimately sell to a large MSO, then sure, partnering. Well, you're not even thinking about partnering right now with an MSO off the bat. What you're doing is thinking about what's going to interest them in partnering with you in the first place. And that's going to be very simply about not even so much revenue, but it's back to that, what we talked about earlier about your total addressable market and how you're going to penetrate that market and create traction. So if you come to me and or come to me or come to or an MSO or a potential acquirer and say, we've got X amount of market share of the very specific demographic that you are targeting, all of a sudden that becomes very attractive, right? It's typically, think buy versus build, right? When it comes to acquisition. And the company that's going to be doing the acquisition, a lot of times they're not interested in building when they can just buy, right? And it could be to buy to knock out the competition, and it is what it is, or it could be buy and they want to support that competition, and so it can really depend on which way you want to go. But that's goes back to it really in the beginning, understanding which path, which channel you see yourself on and see yourself being most successful at. If it's a brand new operator, and this goes from a new brand with an experienced operator, right? How do you develop a brand? How do you develop market share? It's all about community, right? And building any type of community in number that will purchase something, that you produce, regardless of what it is, right? Because they're purchasing from you. They're attracted to your message. They're attracted to your mission, right? And think Red Bull, think Nike, think some of these bigger brands that it's not necessarily, the commercials you see, right? And the events that you see them sponsoring don't necessarily always line up with the product itself as much as it does a feeling or, some type of a program that's offering, impact, right? That aligns with what their message is themselves, right? And if there's that synergy, then they're going to want to acquire or partner with you, right? And if you don't have that community, I'm telling you, you could have the best strains in the world, right? For sale at pretty good prices, right? It's probably not going to be successful, right? But if you're going back to a delivery service, right? If you're a delivery service that really gives back to the community, right? And you can go on social media, right, and see, or a website, right, and that there's constant engagement, right? And if you put out a hat, a sweatshirt, people want to wear it because that brand and that mission resonates with them, then that is going to be successful, whether it's a delivery, whether it's a retail, whoever it may be, right? And I'm glad people are thinking this way because, we are entering a period in cannabis of consolidation. So for people that are sort of just coming on board right now, look for niches, right? And look for things that if you're looking to be acquired, start developing your brand and your business towards that, right? Versus, it's a delivery service. We're going to open and people are going to call, you might want to if you're a delivery, you might want to partner with someone like one of our brands, Cannabis Now. So, that's a great name, Cannabis Now. You're getting it now. And they've got 5 million plus reach, right? Because they're an advertising company, right? And so if you took a brand name like that, licensed it out probably for a limited amount of money, and plop that on your, delivery service, well, now you can advertise nationwide if that's something you're doing, or hyper regional, same type of thing. Partnering up with someone that has that community is really what I'm getting at. It doesn't have to be Cannabis Now. I use it because A, it's a good name, but B, it's really that the essence of what I'm getting at is the community that they've got, right? Cookies, right? That we know Cookies has, Burner's got like 2 million followers, right? So it's the 2 million followers that he's focused on, right? Cookies is not focused on the soccer moms of the world, right? Or cannabis tourists, as they call it, right? They're coming into places like LA. They know cannabis is legal. Consumption lounges are getting started now. Well, shout out to all the consumption lounges out there. It's awesome. But that's not who Cookies is necessarily serving. So you're not going to see them advertising to them, right? And that's something that you'd want to emulate, right? That you really understand and you're hyper focused on who your core community is, who has loyalty to you and your brand, why they have loyalty to you and your brand, and then ensuring that you maintain that and keep doing things like that, which ensure that it stays that way. Those are the things that I'd focus on rather than anything else. Over really anything else is building your core community of consumers.
Definitely. Thank you so much. That was amazing. And I know we're about 15 minutes over, and we do got to wrap things up, unfortunately. So what we'll do is the rest of the questions, since you have these answers kind of typed out, if it's okay with you, we'd love to forward them on to the participants so they can kind of see the remaining Q&A that that we couldn't get to. And then if you do have any last minute thoughts, if you want to leave your contact information, anything you want to say before we hop off, we'd love to just give you the mic and the stage, and go for it.
Well, again, just want to thank you, Sam, and thank the DCR for this wonderful opportunity. I would encourage, as I mentioned, being in the room earlier and networking and learning as much as you can. Take advantage of programs like this, which obviously you are already. Kudos to everybody that's doing that. You're on the right path. And continue to monitor for new programs that are coming out, right? It's usually the regional ones that you want to take advantage of the most, right? Which this is super regional. Definitely take advantage of every resource that there is to offer. Constantly go back to the website, see if there's more there. Reach out to folks like us. You can find me tresscapital.com, TRESS, tresscapital.com. You could find me in social media. It's going to be DHESS213, and that 213, of course, from LA. And so, find me. I'm available. I'm accessible. I enjoy speaking with entrepreneurs. I myself have had, I didn't get into it on this one, but I was an entrepreneur for many years, as I mentioned, in the legacy side, but also had a couple other businesses that I started and exited successfully. And so, I'd love to chop it up with people, especially in the cannabis industry. So give me a call and or reach out via email. Just don't send me an NDA before we speak.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, David. We really appreciate you hopping on. I know it's 10:15 over there right now. So thank you so much for hopping on and staying on a little bit late. And we hope to see you out at the event in February. So we'll definitely keep in touch about that.
Looking forward.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you everyone else for hopping on. And I'm gonna do some closing remarks right now. So thank you all for attending the informative webinar offered by the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation. The webinar recording will be found on the DCR's website, cannabis.lacity.org. If you have any questions on accessing your account, please email dcr.sep@lacity.org. Thanks again for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.